Hi, everybody. It's me, Ms. McNickol. Welcome to episode number 10 of Just Right. Today, I'm going to see if you can guess the kind of writing we're going to do. I'm going to give you some beginnings to this writing, and you see what you come up with. Here's a few. What if my writing began like this? One dark and stormy night. What if my writing began like this? Get out of my way, my brother yelled as he pushed past me and ran outside. What if my writing started like this? Once upon a time, in a land far, far away. What do you think I'd be writing? Probably, you said, a story, Ms. McNickol, a story. And that's right. Today, we're going to just write stories. So let's go inside and get started. Hi, everybody. It's Ms. McNickol. So here we are with episode 10 of Just Right. And today we're going to be writing stories. Some people call that narrative writing. A story is usually narrated by someone, and so we call it narrative writing. A narrator tells the story. I love stories. Stories have been with me all my life. When I was a little girl, my mom would always read me stories, or my big sister, or my big brother. And some of my favorites were stories like Ferdinand the Bull, a story of a bull who doesn't like to fight. And another one was the little engine that kept saying, I think I can, I think I can. I would ask to have these stories read over and over to me. And I think that's what makes a good story. You want to hear it again and again. I bet you have some stories like that. We make stories every day, just from the things that we do. We might trip over something and fall and get hurt, and we tell that again to someone else. It's a story. We might find a special coin digging in a sandbox. We tell it again, and it's a story. Or we might happen to build something with our Legos that we really like, and we share that we built that with other people, and then it's a story. My dad at age 95 still loves to tell stories about when he was a kid. So keep telling stories about things that you do, because they'll be with you for the rest of your life. So let's look at some stories that have been written by authors. We're going to talk about some different types of story writing, or different genres of story writing. So I want to share with you 4 different types of story or narrative stories. The first is when a story is written by the author about something that happened to the author, and they use the word I in the story. And that would be called a personal narrative. Here are some examples. One is Come On Rain. And this story is about a little girl who goes out in a rainstorm. Well, she goes out and it's not raining, and then it rains. But it starts like this. Come on, rain, I say, squishing into the endless heat. And then what happens is her mama, at the end, joins her in her playing out in the rain. So, did you hear that word I? Here's one of my favorites, the ghost eye tree. Listen for the word I in it. One dark and windy autumn night, when the sun had long gone down, Mama asked my sister and me to take the road to the end of the town to get a bucket of milk. Ooh, I dreaded to go. I dreaded the tree. Why does Mama always choose me when the night is so dark and the mind runs free? And so in this story, the author writes about when he was a boy and had to walk by a spooky-looking tree on the way to town. This story, 3 days on a river in a red canoe, is about a family's trip camping and where they go in their canoe. On day 1, we did this, and it tells all about what they did on their camping trip. Another one that you might really like, a personal narrative, and written in that form, is Diary of a Wimpy Kid. All through this book, you have that word I, and where our friend talks about all the things that he did. First of all, let me get something straight. This is a journal, not a diary. I know what it says on the cover, but when Mom went out to buy this thing, I specifically told her to get one that didn't say diary on it. So there's that word I again. Where it's written, we call it in first person, where it sounds like the author is telling the story. Now, sometimes it's a story that sounds like it could happen, but it really didn't happen to the author. And this is a type of story that we call realistic fiction. And it's usually told where somebody else is telling the story, or the narrator. And so you won't find the word I in it. One example is Henry and Mudge books. Henry doesn't tell the story. It's told by somebody else. Like this. On a sunny day, Henry and Henry's mother and Henry's big dog Mudge were sitting on their front porch. A man with a collie walked by. So in realistic fiction, you have a narrator telling the story, and you hear the names of all the characters. Another example would be my book that I like, Ferdinand. Once upon a time in Spain, there was a little bull, and his name was Ferdinand. And so Ferdinand doesn't tell the story, and Monroe Leaf doesn't tell the story. The author, he wrote it, but there's a narrator that tells about Ferdinand. Harry the Dirty Dog, realistic fiction. It could happen. A little dog could go and get all muddy and then come home. And another one that you might know is Tom by Tommy DePaula. Realistic fiction. Could happen, but it's told through the eyes of the storyteller. Once animals or things start to talk in a story, it's no longer realistic because that doesn't happen in real life. So then we have a story that turns into fantasy. Once animals talk, it's no longer realistic fiction, it's fantasy. So Corduroy starts out like it's realistic fiction. Corduroy is a bear who once lived in the toy department of a big store. Day after day he waited with all the other animals and dolls for somebody to come along and take him home. But then what happens is in this story, Corduroy says, "I didn't know I lost a button," he said to himself. And as soon as that happens and he talks, it can no longer be realistic. So Corduroy is fantasy. If you get a book with characters that are made up, like The Cat in the Hat, it's fantasy. If you get a book where the people or where the animals talk all the way through, it's fantasy, like in Poppleton. And if you get a book where there are creatures and monsters, like where the wild things are, it's fantasy. One more. I know it's one of your favorites. That's fantasy is Dogman. Fun story, but it has animals talking and creatures that are made up. And so it's fantasy. The final type of book that I want to talk to you about is one that begins like this. Once upon a time. And we know that stories that begin once upon a time are usually fairy tales. Now, fairy tales are stories that you probably know. Stories like Cinderella, Hansel and Gretel, Jack and the Beanstalk. All of these stories have things in common. They usually begin once upon a time. They usually have good characters and evil characters. They usually teach a lesson. A lot of times they have things that come in threes, like the 3 bears or the 3 little pigs. They may have magic in them. They may have parts of the story or a saying that repeats itself, like run, run, run as fast as you can. You can't catch me. I'm a gingerbread man. Now, sometimes authors decide to take a fairy tale or a common story and change parts of it around to make it a new story, like the gingerbread girl instead of the gingerbread boy, that author decided to change the characters in the story, but kept most of the rest of the story the same. So some authors take a story that they know, like a Cinderella. They change not only something about the character, they might change when the story takes place, or where the story takes place, or some of the magic that's inside of the story. They might make the characters speak more than one language. Sometimes we have different events that happen in stories. Or sometimes you take a story and you make up a totally different story using the same characters. For example, you could make up your own story using Dogman and A New Adventure. Make stories your own. They can be about your life or something that you make up. Just enjoy writing stories. Let's go write some. So when I go to write a story, boys and girls, I need to think about a few things. First, I need to get an idea for my story. What am I going to write about? And I think about things that I've done. I might go in my box and get out my idea book and look through that to get some ideas for what could I write about. I might just have something that's happened to me recently, or I might just say, I just want to make a story up. And so today what I'm going to do, my idea is I'm going to write a story about something that happened to me when I was out walking my dogs a few weeks ago. And what I want to do once I come up with my idea is I want to tell my story out loud if I can, just what's going to happen in my story. So I'll tell you how it goes. So a few weeks ago, I was out walking my dogs, and we always go on the same route through the woods on a path. We go up some hills, we go across a stream, we go up another hill, and then we go down a hill by a huge boulder, and then we come to a pond, and it's a pretty big pond called Clamshell Pond. And this one day in the spring, we started to hear honk, 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 all this geese. It sounded like geese. And I knew the sound because we've heard it before when they fly over our heads. And we looked out, it sounded like there were a lot of geese, and I thought this will be something to see. When we got to the place where we could see the whole pond, there were only 2 geese, and they swam right over toward us. And my 2 dogs were kind of excited. They were looking, and they went into the water because they do know how to swim, but they couldn't go far because they were on the leash. But then they came back out and they watched, and it was almost like the geese were coming over to be their friends. And then I said, all right, we need to go, because I knew geese could be really mean, and we went on our way. We went back a couple days later, and the same 2 geese did the same thing, and they came back again and again. And we went 3 or 4 times, and we'd see the same 2 geese, and every time we were at the side of the pond, they'd start honking and coming over toward us like they wanted to be friends with my dogs. And so one day, last week, what happened was something special. When we got there, we heard the honking again, and we went along our way, and we saw that the geese were at one end of the pond, so we walked that way. And when we got to a place where we could see clearly, it wasn't just the 2 geese anymore. There were 3 baby goslings, that's what you call baby geese, swimming behind them, all gray and fuzzy. The next day we went back, hoping we'd see them again, but they were gone, and we haven't seen them since. So that's the story I thought I would write about today. When you write a story, you might have an idea of something that has happened to you, or you might want to make up a story. If you're making up your story, you need to remember that you need these things. You'll need some characters, whether they're made up, whether they're animals, whether they're people. You'll need a place. Where will your story take place? Will it be in a barn? Will it be in the woods? Will it be in a house? Will it be on a spaceship? You get to make that up. The other thing you'll need to decide is what's going to happen to these characters. There's usually a problem in any story, or something that you wonder about, just like I wondered about those geese and what would happen, what they were all about. And then you need to have the problem solved at the end. And so think of your characters, put them in a place, think of what's going to happen to them, and just start to write. So if I'm going to write my story about my dogs, I might start, once I get my pen to write with, I'll just start. One spring day, I took my dogs for a walk in the woods. I'm going to write it. I have a notebook here, my writer's notebook that I like to write in with the lines on it, do my rough draft, or I might want to put some paper together and make a booklet like many of you have used in school. This one has 6 pages, and I could write part of my story on each page as I go to help me out. So I'm going to start writing. I think of what I want to say, and I put it down. I'm going to start. One spring day. Some of you know how to write exciting beginnings. You've talked about that in school. So I'm going to start. One spring day, I took my 2 dogs for a walk in the woods. And I'm going to keep working on my writing. There I have it started. I'll keep working on it, and then I'm going to be turning it into a book. So why don't you work on a story that you'd like to write? I would write it first on maybe some scrap paper or maybe in a little booklet, because then you can turn your booklet into a book with a cover, which is something we'll be doing. And then I'll show you how to make 2 different kinds of books where you might want to put that story. So let's just write for a little bit. Just write. Hi, writers. How did you do with your story? I ended up writing 2 stories. One, a true story with using the word I, a personal narrative about the day that my dogs and I went and saw the geese. Well, many days actually, because we went back and the baby geese were there. And so I have that story here. It starts out like this. One spring day, I took my 2 dogs, Charlie and JD, for a walk in the woods behind my house. We usually take the same path. We cross a stream, we climb a hill, go over a log, through a swampy area, up another hill, down a hill with a big boulder, and then we reach Clamshell Pond, where my dogs like to take a little swim. I then tell the story about how they saw the geese, and that the geese tried to come over and visit with them, and that we went back a few more times, and it ends like this. Then one day, the days warmed and early spring turned to a late spring, and we again followed our path to Clamshell Pond. We heard the honking and searched the pond, finding the geese at the far end. We went to the bank to see them, and were greeted not by 2 geese, but by 5. Following our 2 friends were 3 gray, fuzzy goslings, and when the geese saw us, this time they swam away from us rather than toward us. We went home excited to have seen the babies and looking forward to watching them grow on our daily walks. But that was not to be so. We have not seen or heard those geese again. Perhaps they'll be back next year. So that's my one story. And my other story, I made up a fairy tale about my 2 dogs, Charlie, and I changed the other one's name to Chewy. So they kind of went along, Charlie and Chewy. It starts like this. Once upon a time, 2 dogs named Charlie and Chewy ran into the woods. They went over a stream, up a hill, and past a huge rock until they came to Clamshell Pond. As they approached, they noticed that the pond was covered with beautiful white swans. So I took something that I knew about me walking in the woods with my dog, and now I've made it a little more magical, changing it into more like a fairy tale. And what happens is the swans have the dogs get on their back, and they fly away with them to a beautiful land on a green meadow with butterflies, and where they play all day until they get hungry. And then Charlie says, I want to go home. And so the swans say to them, all you have to do is bark 3 times and you'll go home. I took that part from a story I know called The Wizard of Oz. And so you take things that you know, things that you've heard, and you can put them into your own stories. And the dogs do end up back home, but once a year they disappear for the day and go off with their friends, the swans. And so that's my other story. So what am I going to do with them? I'd like to put them into some kind of a book. So let's make... And episode 11 will show you how to make 3 kinds of books from your narrative writing. So have fun and just write. Just write me a letter. Just write me a rhyme. Just write me an email. Any old time. Just write me a story. Maybe short, maybe long. Or if you prefer, just write me a song. Just write me a text or a card with a line. Just write me your feelings. I hope you are fine. Just write what you can, write big or write small. Whatever you write will be good for us all. Just write, everybody. Just write. See you next time.